Some things leave marks that no amount of time can fully erase, not on your skin but somewhere deeper. In the part of you that used to believe the person sleeping beside you would never become the thing you feared most. I know that now. I learned it on a Tuesday night in November, when the rain came down so hard it rattled the kitchen window, and my husband's hand came down harder. I didn't scream. That surprised me even then. After everything that had built up over 3 years of marriage, the small cruelties, the money I handed over, the friends I stopped calling because he didn't like them. When the moment finally arrived, I didn't make a sound. I just hit the linoleum floor of our Seattle apartment and lay there. One hand pressed to my ribs, watching his shoes pace back and forth in front of me like a metronome. His name was Carter Wills. When we met, he was the kind of man who held doors open and remembered what you ordered at coffee shops. He laughed easily, spent money generously, and told me on our third date that I was the most grounded person he had ever known. I was 28, working as a pediatric nurse at Cascade Children's Hospital. I thought I had finally found someone worth keeping. I didn't see the other version of him until after we were married. That version arrived slowly. Not all at once, but in degrees so gradual that by the time I recognized it, I had already adjusted my entire life to accommodate it. The way you don't notice a room getting dark until you can no longer read. I had spent 3 years treating myself like a problem to be managed. If I was just patient enough, quiet enough, careful enough, I was wrong about all of it. That night Carter was furious about money. He was always furious about money, but this time it was the joint savings account I had opened in both our names when we moved in together. He had drained it twice before. Each time I asked, he explained, and I believed him. This time I asked to see the bank statements. That was apparently unforgivable. "You think I'm stealing from you?" His voice had that particular flatness that was worse than shouting. The cold, quiet register that meant the performance was over. The cabinet beside my head. The sound split the air and I flinched so hard I knocked my own shoulder into the counter on the way down. Pain cracked through my ribs on the left side, sharp, immediate, unlike anything I had felt before. I couldn't breathe around it. I curled on the floor and pressed my hand there, trying to hold myself together. Carter looked down at me. Something moved across his face, not regret, not even recognition. He checked his phone, slid it into his pocket, said he was going out, the front door shut. I lay on the kitchen floor and counted my breaths. 1, 2, 3. The rain kept going. Then came the sound I had been dreading. The soft creak of a door from down the hall. The patter of small feet. And my son's voice. "Mama?" Noah was 5 years old. He appeared in the kitchen, doorway in his dinosaur pajamas, clutching the stuffed rabbit he had slept with since he was 1. He stared at me and didn't say anything for a moment. I tried to smile. "I'm okay, baby. I just slipped." He looked at the cabinet. He looked at me. He was 5 years old, but he was not fooled. He had heard too much by then. I hated myself for that. For how much he had heard. He walked over carefully and sat down beside me on the floor, pressing his small back against the cabinet and tucking himself under my arm. We stayed like that for a while. After a few minutes, Noah reached into the tiny pocket of his dinosaur pajamas and pulled out my cell phone. I had left it on the coffee table before dinner. I didn't know he had taken it. He held it out to me very seriously. "Call Grandpa," he said. I stared at him. "Grandpa makes things better," he said. "That's what Grandpa does." My 5-year-old sat on that kitchen floor and handed me my phone like it was something sacred, and I felt the last of whatever had been keeping me in place finally give way. My father, Roy Callahan, was not a wealthy man. He was a retired high school history teacher from Portland, who drove a 12-year-old truck and grew tomatoes in his backyard and called every Sunday at 7:30 without fail. He was the most consistent person I had ever known. When my mother passed during my junior year of college, he raised money for my last 2 semesters by selling his bass boat, which he loved more than almost anything in the world. He never told me that directly. I found out years later from my aunt. Carter had never liked him. He said my father was judgmental, that every visit left him feeling surveilled, and so slowly over the course of our marriage I had stopped inviting my father to things, stopped answering his Sunday calls in front of Carter, learned to call back from the hospital parking lot, talking fast, watching for Carter's car. Noah had met my father only a handful of times. He remembered everyone. I took the phone and called my father. He picked up on the second ring. It was after 10 o'clock at night. He sounded alert immediately, the way parents do when something is wrong. "Dad," I said. And then I couldn't say anything else for a moment. He didn't ask me to explain. He said, "What's the address, sweetheart?" I told him. "Lock the bedroom door. Don't open it until I knock 3 times. I'm leaving right now." The drive from Portland to Seattle is 3 hours in good weather. My father made it in just under 2.5. I don't know how fast he drove. I never asked. Noah and I locked ourselves in the bedroom. I sat against the door with my arm around him and his rabbit, and we waited. My ribs ached with every full breath. Carter didn't come back that night. That should have been a relief. Instead, it made me more afraid. The way silence after a storm sometimes feels worse than the storm itself. My father knocked 3 times at 12:47 in the morning. When I opened the door and saw him, gray-haired and tired, still in the flannel shirt he must have grabbed off the back of a chair, his eyes went immediately to my side, where I was holding myself. And I started crying after all. I couldn't stop it. He held me for a long time. Then he held Noah, who fell asleep on his shoulder in approximately 4 minutes. He laid my son on the bed, covered him with the blanket, and then came back to the doorway and said, very quietly, "Tell me everything." I told him. It took a long time. I told him about the money, the savings account, the earlier times Carter had shoved me or grabbed my arm or thrown something close enough to make me flinch. I told him about the friends I had stopped seeing, the Sunday calls I had answered in parking lots, the way I had convinced myself over and over that it wasn't really that bad, that I could manage it, that leaving would mean failure. My father listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "You are not staying here another night." We packed in 40 minutes. I took Noah's rabbit, his favorite blanket, his school backpack. I took my nursing credentials, our passports, and a waterproof folder I had assembled months earlier, almost without letting myself know why. Birth certificates, Noah's medical records, our marriage certificate, the apartment lease. Some part of me had been preparing even while I told myself I wasn't. That folder was the clearest proof I had that somewhere beneath the denial, I had always known. My father loaded everything into his truck and we drove away before 2 in the morning. Noah slept across the back seat. I watched the lights of Seattle disappear in the side mirror, pressed my hand against my ribs, and breathed. The hospital near my father's house confirmed it the next morning. 2 cracked ribs. The doctor, a quiet, precise woman named Dr. Okafor, asked me twice how it had happened. The second time, she held my gaze and didn't write anything down. I understood she was giving me a chance. I told her the truth, all of it. She documented everything, took photographs, and gave me the name of a legal aid lawyer she had referred patients to before. Margaret Solano, who had a reputation, Dr. Okafor said, for not losing. I called Margaret that afternoon from my father's kitchen table, while Noah drew pictures of dinosaurs at the other end. She answered on the first ring. Her first question was, "Are you safe right now?" I looked at my father at the stove, making soup. I looked at Noah and his stegosaurus. "Yes," I said. "For the first time in a long time, I think I am." What followed was not a clean or cinematic process. There was paperwork and phone calls and a vocabulary I had never wanted to learn. Protective orders, asset freezes, custody petitions, financial affidavits. Noah asking where Daddy was. Carter calling first with apologies, then with anger, then going quiet for 10 days, which Margaret said was when people were usually most dangerous. Then Margaret called me on a Thursday morning. "Can you come to my office today? There are some things you should see in person." We sat across from her in her small, book-crowded office. She opened a folder. The joint savings account had not been drained by poor decisions. My money, almost entirely mine since Carter had been inconsistently employed for 2 years, despite his stories about contracts and clients, had been transferred through a shell company called Meridian Lifestyle Solutions LLC to fund a separate apartment in Bellevue, 20 minutes from our home, for a woman named Danielle Park. "They've been in a relationship for approximately 2 years, Margaret said. She slid a photograph across the desk. Carter and Danielle, outside an apartment building. He had a key. Beside him, Danielle was holding the hand of a small boy, perhaps 3 years old. He has a son with her. The timing corresponds with the 2nd year of your marriage." My father put his hand over mine on the table and didn't say anything. While I worked double shifts and handed over my mother's life insurance and believed every explanation, he had been building a second family, 20 minutes away. $94,000. That was how much had been funneled through Meridian. My mother's life insurance, the savings I had built through double shifts and holiday rotations and 3 years of choosing not to spend money on things I wanted. All of it, quietly and systematically, to another woman and another child. I sat in Margaret's office and made a decision. "I want to go all the way," I said. Margaret nodded like she had been waiting for that. The asset freeze went through that week. Carter's calls began again, confused, then outraged, then falsely calm. Each message was forwarded to Margaret. His mother arrived at my father's house on a Sunday and sat at the kitchen table and told me I had destroyed her son. That Carter had made mistakes but was a good man underneath, and that I had pushed him to his limits by questioning him the way I did. I had pushed him. She said it plainly, that I had pushed her son to crack 2 of my ribs. Something in me went very quiet and very clear. "Eleanor," I said, "I'm going to ask you to leave now." 2 days later, Carter filed an emergency motion claiming I had taken Noah across state lines without consent and had a history of emotional instability. Margaret read it to me over the phone. I listened, felt the old familiar fear for approximately 30 seconds, and then I thought about what the motion actually required. It required a judge to look at both of us. It required a hearing. It required evidence. I had Dr. Okafor's photographs. I had 4 months of recorded calls. I had the financial forensics. I had Margaret. "Let's give them their hearing," I said. The hearing was on a Wednesday in February. I wore a navy blazer over a white shirt, pulled my hair back and sat at the plaintiff's table next to Margaret. What happened over the following 4 hours was not dramatic in any cinematic sense. There was the Honorable Patricia Swan, who wore reading glasses and asked precise questions and did not appear impressed by Carter's attorney's language about emotional instability. There were the forensic accountant's figures in black and white. There was Dr. Okafor's report. At one point, Judge Swan looked over her glasses at Carter and asked whether he could explain the transfers from the joint account to an LLC he claimed no knowledge of. Carter said he had made some investments through a third party. Judge Swan said, "Investments in what?" Carter said, "Real estate opportunities." Judge Swan said, "I see," and wrote something down. Temporary custody was granted in my favor that afternoon. Carter was given supervised visitation, 2 hours per week at a family services center. I walked out into a cold February afternoon and called my father. He answered before the first ring finished. I could hear Noah in the background asking if Mama had called. "Tell him yes," I said. "Tell him Mama called." The full trial came in May. By then, through discovery, we had learned that Danielle Park had signed documents on the Meridian LLC, functioning as a willing participant. Margaret added her to a civil complaint for conspiracy to commit financial fraud. 3 weeks before trial, Danielle's attorney contacted Margaret with an offer, a full signed accounting of every transaction, in exchange for cooperation status rather than primary defendant. We accepted. What Danielle provided was, as Margaret put it, the capstone. The trial lasted 3 days. I testified for most of the second day, steadily, completely, without performance and without apology. Carter's attorney challenged me repeatedly on why I had remained in the marriage. I answered honestly, because I had believed it would get better, then because I was afraid, then because I thought leaving would damage Noah, and finally, because my son sat down on a kitchen floor and handed me a phone and said, "Grandpa makes things better." There was a woman in the second row of the gallery who covered her mouth when I said that. The verdict came down on a Thursday afternoon. 42 months for the assault and fraud counts, with additional civil liability on the financial judgment. I walked out of the courthouse for the second time, this time into a May afternoon that was genuinely warm, and my father was waiting at the bottom of the steps with Noah. Noah ran up and grabbed my hands. "Did we win, Mama?" I looked at my son, first grader, rabbit carrier, friend of Tobias who was obsessed with volcanoes, the boy who sat on a kitchen floor and handed me a phone. "Yes," I said. "Can we get pizza?" My father laughed. The sound of it went up into the May air, and I held on to it. That was 2 years ago. There are things I know now that I didn't know then. Things I want to say to anyone who is lying on a floor somewhere, counting their breaths and telling themselves they can manage it. The first thing I know now is that silence never protects anyone. I stayed quiet for 3 years because I believed quiet would keep the peace. It never did. Silence fed the thing. It grew in quiet. The only thing that stopped it was the night I stopped being silent, which was the night my son handed me a phone and I called my father. I used to think that asking for help meant I had failed. I know now that it is the opposite. It is the moment you finally decide your life is worth handling. The second thing, you cannot stay for your children. I believed for a long time that leaving would hurt Noah more than staying. I watch him now. Second grade, taller, louder, falling asleep without fear, talking about his teacher and his best friend with a confidence I don't remember him having before. And I understand that what children need is not an intact household. They need a parent who is not afraid. The version of Noah who tucked himself under my arm on that kitchen floor was already doing the work of a protector. He was 5 years old. That should never have been his job. The third thing, and the one I have thought about most, is that what happens after is also yours to shape. The healing is not passive. I chose it actively, every day. I went back to full-time nursing. I joined a peer support group for survivors of domestic abuse, and after a year of attending, I began co-facilitating. I sat with women in rooms that smelled like coffee and institutional carpet, and listened to stories that were different from mine and exactly like mine, and I told them what my son told me on that kitchen floor, that asking for help is not weakness. It is the most powerful instinct we have. It is what saves us when we finally allow it. Last fall, my father built Noah a raised garden bed in the backyard. They planted tomatoes together. Noah came inside with dirt on his knees and an expression of absolute pride and announced they were going to have the best tomatoes in the whole neighborhood. I stood in the kitchen doorway and watched them in the late afternoon light. My father with his hand on my son's shoulder, showing him how to press the soil down around the base of the plant. And I thought about the night I called him from that apartment floor. The way he said, "What's the address, sweetheart?" The way he didn't hesitate for a single second. I am someone who knows now what she is worth. I learned it the hard way, through loss and fear and a long recovery that is still ongoing. But I know it. My worth is not negotiable. My son's safety is not negotiable. The life I am building room by room, day by day, tomato plant by tomato plant is mine. No one is going to take it from me again.